Turn the page, Sephra, turn the page. Okay. So this month of November, we're in November right now, and November for I don't even know how long, like 20 years, has been known in the writing community as National Novel Writing Month. And what this means, or traditionally has meant, is this is sort of like a way that you can write a novel in a month. So as this idea has grown, and as the internet has grown, and you know, now we have Facebook and writing communities and computerized programs and all this stuff. So NaNoWriMo has really evolved as well as a thing. It's an official thing now, and it's actually more than once a year as well. And I, back in the early days of NaNoWriMo, I never thought much of it. I always figured it was for writers that, well, it was for people who wanted to be writers but probably weren't writers and probably never would be writers, but they get their 1 month to pretend they're going to be a writer. But now, as things have evolved, and I know a lot of professional writers still have the attitude that I don't need a 1 month program to make me write. I gotta write like this every day of the year, every month of the year. I have to write like this. It's not just a one-off once a year. And that's very true. And I personally didn't do NaNoWriMo for years because of that, because I was writing like a book a month, or you know, a lot of stuff. And you know, and maybe all my books don't go to publication like this because I'm editing other people's books, or I'm writing short stories, or I'm writing blogs, or I'm writing on my Patreon or whatever, right? So, but I'm still writing every day, even if it's not a book. But the last few years, I decided to stop being an asshole and kind of check out NaNoWriMo a little more. And so now I have a cabin. So kind of what I want to talk about a little bit is how to strategize your NaNoWriMo so that you can kind of feel like you're getting your bang for your buck. It's a free thing to do. But first of all, instead of vacillating in a vacuum, you can go to the NaNoWriMo website and sign up, and it's free. It's free. So that way now, it's all about accountability, and this is a hard part about being in the arts of any kind. Doesn't matter if you're an artist or a painter or musician, whatever. At the end of the day, you are your own boss, and you have accountability to yourself of what you want from your career. No one gives a fuck if you write a book or paint a picture. There's plenty of artists and writers out in the world. No one wants your book. No one cares. They don't. Nobody cares. So get that out right now. Even your mom probably doesn't care. But anyway, so there's now this website. So you can go sign up. And then they have a spot for projects, so you can list projects that you want to work on. And the idea is to list a project. Some people just work on one thing, others work on several things during that NaNoWriMo month. So the sort of crux of what NaNoWriMo is to write, to write a novel in 1 month of 50,000 words. And then there's a word count. You do, I think, like 1,500 a day or whatever to get to the 50,000. So what's cool is that they unlock this platform in November, and then there's also one in April or June or whenever it is. Watch the website. And so every day that you write, you add your word count to the program, and then you get all these cool little graphs, and there's these little badges and all this stuff. And if you successfully do the 50,000 words, you know, you go, yay, you win, NaNoWriMo. You know, like, I don't think you actually win anything except knowing that you did it. And now they have things where you can donate money to various causes, and they try to sell you all these writing programs and all this stuff. But I don't want to talk about any of that. So what I have found, for me, as someone who's a professional writer who used to be snotty about NaNoWriMo, I admit it, I now use it as a tool for myself to get shit done. I usually have 2 or 3 projects listed as my NaNoWriMo projects, and NaNoWriMo, the platform itself only counts words, but you can get creative like I do. So if I'm working on a screenplay, I'll put down 90 words, but in fact, in my head, I know that's pages. So when I'm doing my count, you know, of what I've done, I'll just put down like 5 words, but it's 5 pages or whatever, and knock that off the list. So that's that's my workaround for that. And then, so this month, I've been really bad this month. I have 2 things on my NaNoWriMo list. One is to write a horror screenplay. I have a bunch of notes for, and I need to write this horror screenplay because I want to send it out in December. And then, my other one is I'm editing a book. Right now the working title is For Witches and a Dude, and it's a fun kind of romance comedy, witchy, sexy werewolf thing. And it's in the same kind of tone as my Witch Upon a Star series. If you've read any of those books, it's like that. Only it's not part of that series. It's for something else. So with that, I've already written 65,000 words on that. And actually a lot of those words I wrote during a NaNoWriMo in the spring. And so now for November, my goal is to pretty it up, to edit it up, to get it, punch it into shape so I can send it out or publish it. I haven't decided exactly what I want to do with that book yet, but whatever, it needs to be done before I can do anything. And I have all these other books I want to write, so I got to get something done. So I'm finding that for NaNoWriMo, this is helping me get projects off my plate, because if you're like me, you have several things on the go. You got your couple of novels, couple of short stories, couple of screenplays, and you're doing your Patreon, you're doing your this, you're doing your that, plus jobs. You know, if I have an editing gig, I'm working on someone else's book, so then all their characters are in my head, and it can be tough. I've been a professional editor for about 15 years, and which is why my output isn't as great as it should be by now at this point in my career, because I always have other people's crap in my head. And then I can't work on my own work because I'm worrying about their work, because they're paying me the big bucks to make sure it's good, right? So I can't be, you know, screwing around with my own stuff. But now I'm taking way less editing projects because I realize I'm not getting any younger, and I need to get more of my books finished. So for me, it's a really good push to complete a project. And I highly recommend a lot of you who may have trouble with accountability to yourself, that these graphs and badges and all that crap might be good for you. Now, the other facet of NaNoWriMo that is quite good for most people is the whole idea of they call them cabins. So you have a little group or community or whatever. And some of you may not know anyone at all in the writing world, and but they have groups by like there's several Toronto groups, and anyone can join them. And I've noticed in some of the Toronto groups, I'm not officially, like, I don't do the things. I clicked a Toronto group, but I'm in a little cabin. I'll talk about that in a minute. But in like something like the major Toronto group that has, you know, tons of, probably 1,000, I didn't look, but lots of people, probably 1,000, maybe more, maybe less. I don't know. Maybe they only have 20 people. I don't know. But I do know that they do things like on Saturdays, they'll have write-ins, and so everyone will sit and work on their stuff. And before the situation, they would have sit-ins, and so you could go, you'd all meet like at the Toronto Public Library, and you'd all bring your laptops and you sit. I've never done that myself, but I've seen it and heard it, and I know about it. And for a lot of people, they love that, because they're interacting with other writers. Everyone's in the same boat, that I got to get my 2,000 words done today. Don't talk to me. You know? and then they all go for coffee after. Phew, got that done, you know. And so you make friends in the field, and you're interacting with other writers, and maybe if you're having a bit of a block, there's something you can talk to with other people, or do you think I should end my chapter here? I don't know, you know. And so you can either talk, you know, make friends and just talk about life stuff. You can make friends and talk about writer stuff and all of that. So it's excellent for making new friends and not feeling so alone, or that you're writing in a void, and that you know, because maybe everyone close to you in your real life thinks you're crazy because you want to be a writer. Well, this helps you with that. And then on a bigger picture too, like, as a lot of you know, I was the Ontario chapter head of the Horror Writers Association until this past summer, when I finally stepped down after 27 years of running it. And but over the years, I've met a lot of people, obviously, and so I'm in a cabin with a couple of other people from the HWA from around the world. There's several of us from around the world in this cabin. The cabin itself is a Canadian writer who I know in real life, and then so there's a few of us Canadians, but there's also other people from the Horror Writers Association in our little cabin. I think we have maybe 12 people in there, but most of us don't say anything or do anything. We just, like, because there's, if you have a cabin with friends or a little group, I think it's called community on the website. Sometimes I call it a cabin, depends which part of NaNoWriMo part of the year. I think in the summer they're cabins and whatever. Anyways, so there's like a little message board. You can talk to each other. Hey, did you get any words done today? You know, and all that. Sometimes we talk a lot. Sometimes we don't talk at all. This month I've noticed in the November ones, most of us don't talk because most of us never meet our goals because there's too much other stuff going on. I don't think I've done one thing yet for my NaNoWriMo projects, and it's what, we're on the 20th now, because I've been writing all these other things. I've been sending out screenplays and polishing them up and all this, right? So I'm trying to get my foot in the door for screenwriting. And it's hard because I'm starting a brand new career. I should just stick to being a novelist. That's what I know. But no, I have to make life hard for myself and start examining a film career. But so what's fun about that is in our little cabin, we'll talk to each other or not. And then the person who created our cabin, she's also created a Discord for us. So all year long, we can go into that Discord and bitch and moan, or we can she also posts a lot of writers markets, or if people hear about a market, they'll post in the writers market section, so you know where to send your stuff once you've written it, if you don't already know where you're sending it. And so it's fun like that. So you know, the idea is, of course, NaNoWriMo is a thing, and then it can branch out to many other things. And you never know who you're going to meet and who you're going to see and how that person may help your career. And then also another thing I wanted to say about the NaNoWriMo experience is one of the people in our cabin last year actually won a Stoker Award for the book she wrote in our cabin during NaNoWriMo. So when people say, oh, it's just gobbledygook, oh, you end up with just a book of mush and nobody does shit with it or whatever. Well, this woman, she polished that baby up, and it's been winning awards. So you just don't know where NaNoWriMo is going to take you, where that inspiration's going to go. So like I said, so you can manipulate it to how you are living your life. You know, if you don't finish your project, you don't get a frowny face or anything. Like, nothing happens. The trap door doesn't open and you fall in. Like, you don't finish, you don't finish. But it feels good if you do. And like I said, I've started to try and get on board with it all the last couple of years. And I feel good when I can put down my word count, even if it's, you know, not authentic. Like I said, in the spring it was, because the book I'm working on now, it's starting at 65,000 words, and I'm trying to edit it. So I'm still not sure how to put down that word count, because it's about half edited before I started NaNoWriMo, but I'll just play with stuff. But if I get to the end of the editing process of this book, then I'll just put down that I wrote the 50,000 words, because I don't know what I'm writing or not writing. I'm not keeping track. The editing process is a very important part of the writing process. But the idea with NaNoWriMo is for you just to sit down and spit out that first draft. That's what it's for. That was the original intent of the project, and that's really what it's for, especially for people who are not sure how to start a book or how to write a book, or I don't have time. You know, you make the time for 1 month to spit out these 2,000 words a day or whatever, right? So at the end of it, you should have about 50 to 60,000 words, which still is not a full book. That's not a book. Flush Failure is about 30,000 words, I think. I can't remember what the final thing is, but it's what they call a novella. It's not a full book. That's why there's 2 books in Experiments in Terror. That's why there's 2 books in there, because it had to be made to about a 90,000 word book. And so Captured Souls, which is the companion with Flesh Failure in the Experiments in Terror book, that book's about 55,000 words, which is like a perfect NaNoWriMo length, right? I didn't write either of these in NaNoWriMo. But in the real world, publishers want books that are about between 90 and 150,000 words, maybe 80. It depends on the publisher, but you can read their guidelines and see. So yes, you may come out of NaNoWriMo and doing everything perfectly, hitting the words and all that, and you make your quota. So at the end of it, you're with a first draft of a 50,000 word book. So that's where the really hard work begins. So now you go through your book for your second draft, and you have to decide, first of all, is this even a book? It might just be a bunch of blah, blah, blah. So then you have to start shaping it. And that's, for me, that's an exciting part of the process, the writing process. A lot of people like the first draft first because you're just writing, you're not thinking. And the idea with NaNoWriMo is definitely not to think. For someone like me who's a professional writer and been writing for years, there have been times where I've had to write a book within a couple of months. And so with that, like, there's no time for drafts. Everything does have to be perfect. You really do have to think every sentence as you write it, and you're making all the notes and you're cards, and I still use paper cards and notebooks. You know, I have dozens of these notebooks hanging around, and index cards. You know, I'm old school with the index cards. So I have physical stuff I can see. I find on computer my files get all over the place and all that. Though I will say with Final Draft with screenwriting, I am enjoying using the Beats part of the software, so maybe I'll get more in tune when it's novel writing to use more of these types of computer things, but probably not, because I like just being able to look through stuff, and I don't need the computer to work or worry if it's getting lost. And even if the whole computer crashes, I still know who my main character is. But everyone has their own way of writing and doing things, and so you'll end up with this 50,000 word first draft of, does it even end, does it start? And so here's you know, I do teach novel writing at George Brown College, and I do teach horror writing on Udemy. And so one of the very first things to figure out when you're looking to work on that second draft is, you know, what is your book about? What is the theme? What are you trying to say? What's the deal? And as you go through and read your book and make your notes, you might realize you have too many characters. You might realize that you have 2 characters doing the same thing, so you can squish them into 1 character. And don't forget, every line of dialogue needs to move the story forward. Every scene has to move the story forward. And so that's what you know, after you get through the first draft and not worrying about moving the story forward, now this is where you have to be hardcore and figure out, is this scene necessary, or was this just fun to write? Usually the scenes that are the most fun to write are the ones you need to throw away. And I know it hurts. I know it sucks. You've heard a million times writers saying, kill your darlings. And it's true. Your favorite scenes to write are usually the ones that do not work for the book. And so you must eliminate them. And, another thing you'll find, especially if you're kind of doing cold writing, like in a NaNoWriMo and just kind of blah, 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 you may find the first 10, 15, 20, 30 pages of your book you can throw away as well. Because a lot of times when we first start working on a story or a book, we're still trying to navigate, where does my story actually start? And sometimes it takes a few pages to kind of turn the engine on and get to know the people and go to the bar and, you know, get in the car and find the mysterious package or whatever. And even if you start right away with the mysterious package, there still might be a lot of blah, 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 backstory, flashback, why am I here, you know, all this. So this is where we realize that there'll be a lot of pages, especially if you're NaNoWriMoing, you need to throw out. Don't even try to save them, just bye-bye. And then so we get into tightening, what they call tightening up the story. So figuring out the bones of the story is the second draft. And then you can make notes. So you're going through, and that's kind of what I've been doing with where my book is now. I've sort of gone through and figured out the bones. So I did have an outline before I started. And like I said, I've written like 30 books or something. So I kind of have it down what the bones are, but still not always. And, you know, and you may not have decided on your ending yet. You may be trying to decide between 5 different endings and all that. So the second draft really is just finding the bones of the story. Where does the story begin? And where does it end? What is the inciting incident? That's a screenwriting term, but we use it in novel writing as well. We just don't call it that usually. But, you know, what's the inciting incident that launches the story? You know, do you really need those 30 pages of Carla being depressed about her life until the inciting incident? You know, I don't know, like, when does Harry Potter get the letter, you know, to go to Hogwarts? So think about that, you know, and what's the difference between the book version and the movie version of that inciting incident? How much do we get to know him? And what seeds are planted before you get to know him, right? So that's what the second draft is for, is just trying to find out the bones of the story. What is your story? What are the overarching themes? Where's the climax? Where does it end? And it doesn't have, that doesn't have to be perfect either, because you got many more drafts to go. But then the next draft is when you'll start expanding on the bones. You got to put some flesh back on the bones. So you had your first draft, which was just vomiting it out. Vomit, vomit, vomit. Blah, words on pages, words on pages. NaNoWriMo, words on pages. Second draft, whoa, too many words. Bare bones. So maybe now you're down to a 30,000 word novel because you've really taken to heart all the extra stuff and combined a couple characters, cut out a few scenes, made little notes about new scenes that need to be added, and so on. Then when you're getting into your third draft, then you'll want to start putting flesh back on the bones. So this is where you start doing the fun writing. This is the good writing. It's like making your words pretty, making the sentences nice, and telling your story, you know, figuring out your narrative voice. You may have to do more drafts. It's like with Flesh Failure, as well as My Story Captured Souls, with both of them, they weren't first person when I started. Experiments in Terror was third person journals and diaries, but then but from someone else's point of view, and then that it became first person through journals and diaries. And it's all just journals and diaries, because before it was, there'd be like the doctor would write something in the journal, and then it would go to the narrative, the omniscient narrator, whatever, and then Dr. Miriam Frederick went across the room and plugged her monster in, or whatever, right? But now it's all just first person journaling. And then Flesh Failure used to be third person. You know, she pulled herself out of the ground. She was a mess. She was all pussy and disgusting. She went and drank the absinthe. She wandered over to see the Elephant Man and all that, right? But then, as you see, now it's first person. And so when you're dealing with narratives like that, this is, you know, the second or third, even fourth, even later drafts, is when you start to think about how the story is being told. Why are you telling the story? And which character is telling the story? Or is it just some faceless narrator telling the story? Is someone who's in the story telling the story? Is the main person telling the story? And then I have a book, Mistress of the Dark, as well as Captured Souls. They're both journal-y stories, but it's in what they call an unreliable narrator. Both the narrators of those stories, you know, that they're both stories about psychopathic liars. So this character may be telling you things, but they could be lying. It may not be true. You know, Dr. Mary, oh, she's typing in her journal about this and that. It might all just be bullshit, right? And that's fun to do. But you have to decide when you're telling your story how you're going to tackle that, how not to confuse the reader, how much you give to push the story forward, and how much do you sprinkle through to show that this person may not actually be telling you what's really going on. If you know what I mean. So yeah, so these are all kind of things you worry about after you pile on that first draft. So for NaNoWriMo, this is, I'm going to hang up now, but unless you have questions, if anyone has questions about writing or the writing process or anything at all, so I would say for NaNoWriMo, just puke it out. That's it. Just throw everything on the page. Do not second guess. Do not second think. You know, don't think you have too many characters. Don't think this is dumb. Don't think, why am I here? What did I change tenses here? And oh my God, no, don't worry about any of that stuff. And you, that's all for later drafts. That's why there are drafts. NaNoWriMo is just boom, throwing it all out there. Oh, and I guess I should say, because I am reading from Flesh Failure, that while I was writing it, it wasn't always set in 1888. It was just some random time in some random place. And then as I was researching electricity and things like that, Mary Shelley and so on, I started to realize I wanted it to take place in 1888 because it is the year of the Ripper, Jack the Ripper, and the year the Elephant Man was in London Hospital, and a lot of things happened that year in London, England. And so historically, it's kind of fun for me to plug in. My character is fictional. Agatha is fictional, obviously, but it's fun to plug her in with, right now, the piece I read today, she's hanging out with the Whitechapel prostitutes that, you know, Jack the Ripper's going to come and kill. He's lurking. We touched a little bit tonight on the prostitute told Agatha that there's been some murders, and that's kind of that. But that's Jack the Ripper. He's in there, and he's in that book. But I did not start the book thinking I was writing a Jack the Ripper book. It was a Frankenstein book. And then it's gone on to be more so of many of these ideas, which is what you can do. So, but you can't do anything till you get that first draft done. You can't. If you don't have words actually on the paper or in the box, you can't You can't go anywhere or do anything. It's just, there's nothing. So get those words out for NaNoWriMo. And like I said, I've edited a lot of people's NaNoWriMo books over the years. That is one of the things I do. So when you're finished your book and you want someone to punch it into shape, whether you want developmental editing, which is looking at the story flow and do you have too many characters, is it set in the right place, or the tense, should it be, you know, what tense do you want to be in, and all that. That's developmental editing. Then there's copy editing, which is the grammatical, fixing the, you know, apostrophes and sentence structure and all that kind of stuff, right? So it's different. There's I can talk another several hours about editing, the types of editing and all that, but there are many types of editing and many types of editors, and I don't even mean freelance and publishing houses and stuff, but just even dealing with editors in general. Is many types and kinds. For instance, if you're trying to be published traditionally, you need to go through the big editor, the executive editor, the editor who buys stuff, the acquisitions editor. That's the person who's looking at all the stuff that's coming in, and they got to decide what fits, you know, and they get to buy 12 books a year. And so they got to decide, you know, which 12 books are they buying. Then they have to go to their bosses and pitch it to the marketer, pitch it to the publisher, whatever. Then they come back and then they say, hey, we're going to buy your book. So when they buy your book, they're kind of done with you for a bit. So when you turn in your manuscript a year later, or whatever your contract is, they will read it and they'll decide if you're up to snuff or not. You know, if you did the job you said you were going to do, is this the book you said you were going to write, or is this something you got to throw away? So they're going to check and make sure you did your job. And then it goes off to many other editors. You know, there's copy editors and all that. You won't see, the acquisitions editor might be kind of like a developmental editor, but not really. You probably wouldn't have a developmental editor at a professional traditional publishing house because you've already done that shit at home. That's your stuff. But when I worked for a vanity press, developmental editing was huge for the longest time until they phased it out about 5 years ago. So I don't work with them anymore. But at the time, people who self-publish or go through a vanity press, which is just self-publishing with help, a lot of them really needed developmental editors because they didn't know how to structure stories. They didn't know how to frame it. They didn't know where the book began and ended. They didn't understand their characters and so on. So I really earned my money as a developmental editor. I edited almost 1,000 books for that company. And a lot of these people, you could tell they didn't even go to grade 5, you know, and they're trying to publish a book that they want people to buy with money. So my job was just like pointing out all this stuff, and then they would go on to other editors as copy editors and grammatical editors and line editors, and they'd go through another 4 sets of editors as well. So editing never ends, and it really doesn't. It's just like, you know, you can write your book forever and it'll never be the perfect book you want, and the same can be for editing. A lot of editing is subjective, and then depending, you know, as a developmental editor, a lot of it is subjective. But then when it comes down to copy editing, there are actual rules, and you can look up the rules yourself. You can get yourself some grammar books, but there are actual rules that are not subjective whatsoever, like spelling. But anyways, so that's my Saturday night prattle about writing and editing and NaNoWriMo and people fighting outside my building. I think that was the most exciting part of the night, was wondering if the guns were going to go off again. Because there have been shootings. It's a big city after all. The shootings do happen, but I'm glad they didn't happen tonight so far. All right. So enjoy your evening. And oh, I see my squares all screwed up, so maybe I'm not even online anyways. All right. Have a fantastic Saturday night. Enjoy that full moon energy. There should be lots of inspirational energy for you still. And we will talk soon. Bye-bye.